So good morning. We're out before, apparently it's going to rain later, so good to get out this time of morning. And it doesn't feel like there's quite as much pollen in the air, which I'm really grateful for. We gave Banjo his annual haircut yesterday. Can you see that lithe, skinny, scrawny dog? Hey Banjo, show everyone your new haircut. Isn't that smart? Very nice, right? Luna, on the other hand, is constantly hairy. So not much we can do about that. She'd look ridiculous if we shaved all of that off. We think she's got a bit of husky in her. Anyway, let's turn this camera around. So last few days, last 2 days, started with Thanksgiving and that place where thankfulness is really good for the soul. It's good for our well-being. And we looked at hope, which is a way of maintaining engagement with life, enthusiasm for life, and it's part of one of the qualities that actually our faith should lead us into. And I thought I'd pick up a little bit more on the theme of hope this morning. So I think it was obviously it was in the book I wrote a few years ago called Supernatural Hope. The first one, Supernatural Life, and then we did the second one, the follow-up, Supernatural Hope. And I kind of kicked off, I used as a foundational verse for that, verse at the beginning of the book of Ephesians. I think it's verse 28. I'm probably kind of putting people in all the wrong directions, but so one Ephesians 1, verse 28, I think, where it says, where Paul is praying that he doesn't use the word revelation. He says the eyes of our heart. So that's right. Will be enlightened. The eyes of our heart will be enlightened. Pray that the eyes of your heart will be enlightened, so you'll know what is the hope of your calling. And an interesting little kind of dynamic there that tells us that something, if you like, of the hope which becomes the foundation of faith, which becomes the foundation of fruit, because we sow by faith. And faith is the assurance of the things we hope for. And hope comes out of our calling. So I just thought I'd touch on that a little bit, because as some of you will be aware, one of the things I do is I work with people in their workplaces. Because Jesus makes that statement, which I've probably said before in this, because I know there are certain phrases I use all the time, but when Jesus says many are called but few are chosen, that's a kind of a Hebrew way of saying everybody's got a calling, but not most people don't seem to discover it. And we have all sorts of evidence in the rest of the New Testament that kind of confirms that idea. It talks about walking in the works that He's prepared beforehand for us. Although I wouldn't want to make a kind of absolute sense and then get into arguments with folks, but I tend to use a working definition to try and help unravel, if you like, the different layers of calling and identity. And I often use, actually, Jesus is a good example, but there are a couple of the apostles, both Peter and Paul. You can see some of this in as well, and probably others if I stop and think about it. But Jesus is born into a family of builders, tectons, which we translate as carpenters, but it's more that he's working within the building construction industry than making kind of beautiful chair legs and so on, which I'm sure he could do. And part of the reason why we've taken on the idea that as a tecton Jesus was a carpenter was because the kind of medieval church liked the idea that Jesus actually made yokes, so that when he says my yoke is easy, they like the idea that actually he made really the best yokes possible, which is a lovely thought. But I think is kind of reading in. Mind you, people accuse me of doing that all the time, so I suppose I shouldn't kind of complain. But I find something very powerful, and I think you find it in the language, as I've touched on before, around Jesus. There's a lot of building language that Jesus uses and people use to him and about him. So it makes sense to me. Paul saying I work with him as a master builder, as an architecton, that kind of thing. I will build my church, says Jesus. Paul says he's edificizing us, building us up, but building in a sense of a building rather than kind of bodybuilding. So we get all of that, and And actually, of course, if you root back, you can see, there's something of Jesus' identity, because he was it says in Proverbs 8, I was alongside him as a master workman, as a master tecton. It's not tecton because it's Hebrew, but this is Proverbs 8. So wisdom, who we identify with the personhood of Jesus, the pre-incarnate Jesus, declares, who's active regarding creation, that she, because it's feminine, wisdom is feminine, but we shouldn't get too hung up on that. We're very hung up on gender in the 21st century. Gender is just a language construct. Yes, they're absolutely right. Gender is a social construct, but your biological sex, that's something different. So wisdom was there as a builder, but Jesus is a builder in creation. He's a builder in his incarnation, because he's born into a building family, and he's a builder in his ascension, because he will go and he will build his church, and he is edificizing us, and he is fitting us together into a holy habitation, into a temple, as living stones, all of that kind of language that we find. So there is something about physically building, and probably as Jesus grows up, he goes up to the town a few miles, 3.5 to 4 miles north of Nazareth, which is Sepphoris, which is one of the biggest building sites in Jesus' lifetime in the entire ancient world. It's being built into a new capital. It will eventually be superseded by yet another new capital, Tiberias. But at the moment, Sepphoris is going to be the capital of Galilee. It's being rebuilt because it's been destroyed the previous generation by the Romans because of insurrection. So Jesus is a builder in his lifetime. But then, of course, there's a point where he goes and gets baptized by John, and his building is now very different. The way he builds is very different. But he clearly has never lost, if you like, something of the identity. Why? Because he's part of who God is, and God has always been a creator, maker. And there's something in that kind of building thread that's more than just the production of a farmer, because it's seeing new things emerge. You plant an oak tree produces an acorn. You plant the acorn, it produces another oak tree. That's productive. Whereas building is kind of creative. You dig up some mud, you make some bricks, you fit them together, and suddenly you've got a hospital or a school, and something new has emerged. So there's something in the nature of who God is that is a builder. Think of those images with God kind of get very Masonic, don't they? With his compass and set squares and whatever, looking over creation. But we get it, we understand that, and some of that identity in Jesus is then given an expression to a calling which, for 30-something years of his life, is worked out in Sepphoris with a particular job title. We don't know what that was. But then he moves on, but he doesn't stop building. He's now building a team. And so Peter is able to pick up that kind of theme that he's seen and worked through. And I love doing the teaching through the different phases of Jesus' ministry, because you can see it very, very well laid in terms of laying foundations, laying kind of strength and experience, laying the seed, planting, if you like, the seeds for future growth. And so you can see a very kind of deliberate sense of building and what Jesus does with the people, which is then expressed by Peter in his book, in his letters, I should say. So calling and identity are not exactly the same, because calling can be temporal. There are works that God has prepared for you to do, and they're often for a season. And one of the tough things is when suddenly that season's over, and we can seem to then sometimes feel like we've lost our identity, because the thing I was doing, and I've gone through that myself. I remember as a teenager knowing that the Lord was calling us to lead church, and suddenly finding ourselves in a place where we were leading church. It felt like the most natural expression of who God had made me. And then suddenly all that got disrupted. And I found myself doing all sorts of weird things. But as it stripped right the way back, and I understood, if you like, my identity in Jesus, you find new ways. And funny thing is, part of this is part of it. I recognise that in many ways, part of the way we built things when we were leading church was because fundamentally there's something in me that loves to observe, see things. So I love research. I love digging stuff out. I get a real buzz from it when I discover something new. And then I love showing people. And It's interesting. One of the marks that someone once said to me just recently, they were talking about in a context where someone who had an awful lot of knowledge was in the same room, and I didn't ask for this kind of comment, so you hear I wasn't fishing for it or anything, but they said there's such a big difference. You said you love to give stuff away. You love to give stuff away and you hope that it will benefit people, and if it doesn't, you're not too bothered by that. And he said, whereas that so-and-so, it needs to make you feel like you have to agree with their opinion all the time. Now, I wasn't wanting to make any kind of comparison. I just thought it was interesting because I think they were right in terms of what they said. Is there something in me that loves the research, loves to see things, and then loves to give it away, and then if people don't like it, that's fine, because I've still got the thrill from having found it, and I don't want to kind of own it in any kind of sense. So anyway, it sounds like I'm self-justifying my my role in the world, but which I'm not trying to do. What I'm trying to say is, I believe that there is a calling for everybody. There are things that God has got for you that you can do, that makes sense of what's in you, that makes you tick. The aspect of God's nature that you embody, because none of us embody it all. We all have our little pieces. And some of those enthusiasms are outward facing, and we talk about those people sometimes as extroverts, and others of them are more introspective. And I think both of those aspects are part of who God is, because if you think about it, he's a creative God, so he's looking out, and yet part of that initial creation was internal. It gave birth to the Word, to the Son. And the Word is begotten, not created, so it was an internal process too. So we all have those different leanings, and you might go on a Myers-Briggs things, or you go on a whatever, and you kind of get told this is who you are, and it's focusing on personality. But actually, I think for me, there's too much talk about personality. It's much more an issue of identity and character. We find that place of identity and character actually allows us to keep going, and we keep working out, if you like, what it is that God's given us to do in this context. And when we're doing that, let's go back to the verse we started with, that there would be, that I pray, says Paul, that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened. So in other words, you'd suddenly you see something in that emotive centre of who you are, to know the hope of his calling. Because within that process, it's not just about busyness. There is locked up in it are the foundations of the hope that can keep you engaged with life. And because, as I was saying yesterday, probably not very clearly, but once we lose the sense of hope, we very quickly lose the sense of engagement with the world around us, and then we are very susceptible to that thing of, I don't want to be here anymore. And we think we want to move on to the next thing. But actually, we can know heaven on earth. So if we think the next place is good, there is a way of getting hold of that piece of heaven in this life too. And a lot of that comes down to the sorts of areas I've been touching on this morning, I think. I think they do anyway. That's my experience, and I'm sticking with it. I'm just going to turn this around so as we walk down this way. So what does that mean in practice? Well, in practice, it means that we all have to do jobs, and so there are aspects of every job that are not much fun. I have exactly the same issue. There are bits I like doing in what I do, and there are bits I don't enjoy doing. But so fun or not fun is not the story. The question really is does this feel like something the Lord's given me to do, or is it just something I'm doing? And I remember talking to someone once who, hopefully they've moved on from this position, but they had a very important job nationally within the civil service. And I was talking to them about their sense of calling in their workplace, and they actually said, no, not really, I don't have that. Said, I'm really active in church, I help with worship and with the children's work, and that's where my calling is worked out. And it struck me because it's alien to the way I think, that really they were just doing this for the money, even though it has so much shaping and responsibility with people's lives that they were managing, and so on. And so one of the questions I have for everybody, I'm just going to stop banjo rolling or something, come on we come, is do you have that sense of what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing? And if not, there are probably two things. If not, either I need to find a change in my attitude, a change in my heart. I need to ask the Lord to show me why it is, because it's not at all unusual for an area that should be part of your calling to feel really unpleasant because you go through very painful experiences. I can talk to you about that from real experience, and Judith can as well. I'm sure you'll know people who can. So the very things that actually should be that source of life for us, that source of hope and engagement, because of what's been done to us, because of the things and jealousies or whatever else, we can look at it and we can kind of reject it as being that place. So it's quite possible that there's things that need to be healed in our attitudes, things that need to be challenged. So I make myself open, say, okay, Lord, if this is the right place and I really don't feel engaged through it at all, help me to re-engage, help me to see it, help me to become enthusiastic against. Or, which is also very common, we are just doing something because we've not really taken the time to step back and ask myself, why do I do this? What's the point of it? And that's a really important question to ask, because sometimes jobs that don't seem slick and sensational, but they have aspects in them, in our interaction with people, that are actually part of our identity. What is it you've got to give them? As I was saying with myself, it's not about position, but it was about being in the place where I had an opportunity to give away what I'd discovered, and that's really key to who I am. And if I can find that, then actually I'm in a good place. Oh, we're meeting a lot of dogs now. Hello, dogs. So we'll head up this way. So I'm just kind of in that place now. Well, I've just finished my... turn this around so you can now see me. So those are my thoughts really for this morning. They all relate to the things we've been touching on the last few days, which is about finding a life and drawing satisfaction from it, that sense of meaning, purpose and engagement. So I'm just going to finish and pray for those things today, that Lord Jesus, you'd help us all take a step into the engagement that comes from knowing the hope of your calling in the things that we do. And there are times when those things get challenged, and the way we express them we find is different, but in the end it always roots down to who you've made us, and the skills in who we are that respond different ways to our circumstances as they come and change and go. So in Jesus' name, I pray you'll make us more and more fruitful in terms of knowing those things. Amen.